Hi, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming here again for another round of questions.
It's been almost exactly 2 years. So
yeah, it's been exactly
cool.
2 years. Yeah. I thought it would be a good idea to do another interview. I like to call them conversation. Really,
Yeah. That's more what it is.
interview sounds a bit like too formal, but
podcast.
Yeah, podcast, conversation, whatever. Also because the video we did actually did quite well. I think we got over 30k views, so people appreciated it. And I just want to give a mention to, I don't know the name of the person, I'll show the comment on the screen probably, but there was someone praising me for being able to record while on holiday, and I appreciate people noticing that because it is a bit of, organization.
Sure.
When you don't have your normal regular gear, I guess. So yeah, Matt, how are you? Let's start with a generic question.
Good. Yeah. I mean, we're both in Osaka right now. I'm last time that we filmed, I lived in Osaka. Now I live in Tokyo, but I'm just here on a trip. So it's good to be back.
Yeah. It's funny because last year I thought you were still in Osaka, and then when I left Tokyo, I messaged you. I was like, "No, you were in Tokyo."
Missing each other. Yeah, that's funny.
And now we're supposed to meet in Tokyo, and now we meet in Osaka. So it's always kind of random. I guess I'll just start with my questions, and then towards the end of the interview or conversation rather, we'll probably go through some of the questions that people on Twitter and Instagram have asked.
Sweet.
So my first question is, last time we spoke, you had only been in Japan for a few months, I believe. Was it like a year maybe?
Probably. Yeah.
2 years ago.
Let's see. It'd probably have been exactly a year.
Okay.
Around.
So you've been here for 3 years basically.
Yeah, basically exactly 3 years, yeah.
And now that it's been 2 more years, how has your experience evolved? Not just day-to-day life, but also your mindset in terms of language learning, anything that might have changed or...
Yeah. Well, I mean... The first year I was in Japan, I was studying abroad, technically. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was only really doing it for the visa. But I was going to like a normal 4-year university here with almost all Japanese students.
Okay.
And so, that was mostly what I was experiencing is kind of that like Japanese college life in a sense. And so for these last 2 years, well, I haven't been a student. And really, I only kind of started making content regularly again, like 6 months ago. So, yeah, I mean, moving to Tokyo was a big change. And then now kind of going back to making fun content full time and actually like doing language learning or helping other people do language learning for a living has been pretty different. So yeah, I mean, now that I'm living in Tokyo, I mean, in a way, it's almost kind of like my current life is feels like a hybrid of what my life was before I moved to Japan and what my life was in that first year, kind of in a way. Mm-hmm. I mean, with language learning, also, I had a lot of kind of, I guess, updates in the way I think about language learning. Not necessarily directly from living in Japan, but mostly just because as I started making content again, I started spending more time like doing, research into linguistics and doing language learning myself. And then also I've been running this online language learning community. And so I interact with everyone there and people have new ideas and test them out. And so I have had a lot of kind of evolution to my language learning thinking.
Okay. So I've got many questions now. So what motivated you to move from Osaka to Tokyo? I mean, if it's not anything too personal.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing was, well, at the time I had a business partner that lived in Tokyo, who's now my ex-business partner. So that was like the number one direct reason, but also like almost everyone who does similar stuff like content creation or language teaching and stuff, like 90% of people are in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot more networking options and possibilities. And I had a ton of friends in Tokyo. Like my first year here, like I said, I was going to university. And so a lot of my friends were either Japanese people that were going to that university or other people that were studying abroad at the university, and then everyone kind of either graduated or moved on or went back. And so even though I was living in Osaka, there was a point in time I had more friends in Tokyo, basically.
Okay.
So yeah, I kind of just felt like the natural move. I mean, I still love Osaka, but I guess some people, have like a really deep love for Osaka, right?
I do, for sure.
Yeah. And like, I totally get that. I think the reason why, like, 'cause I love Osaka, but like, I don't have that next level of passion for Osaka. And I think probably the reason is because by the time I moved to Japan, my Japanese identity, you could say, was already pretty developed because I had spent so long learning Japanese outside of Japan. And when I was learning Japanese in America, I was mostly focused on standard Japanese and like Tokyo culture. Mm-hmm. And, I spent a couple of years dating a Japanese girl that was from Kanto. And so my Japanese identity was almost built up as like a Kanto person. So it almost felt like my Japanese identity as a Kanto person coming and like spending some time in Osaka and thinking it was cool, but I still, in a weird way, feel like Tokyo is my Japanese home because that's kind of the Japanese culture that brought me up,
Okay. So how come you started your life in Japan in Osaka and not Tokyo straight away?
Yeah, well, the only reason is because, like I said, my first visa was a student visa, and I only had accesses access to certain colleges, and none of the colleges that I had access to are in Tokyo. If like I could have gone straight to a college in Tokyo, then I would have probably done that. Although I did have interest in like Osaka and Kansai Ben, and so I did like the idea. Like there was a point in time where I'm like, maybe I'll try to master Kansai Ben and I'll be like the one foreigner with perfect Kansai Ben. But yeah, I kind of gave up on that.
Okay. So something else that I'm wondering is, I mean, personally, I used to live in the UK and I had learned English to well, maybe not native level, but probably B2, near C1 level before, prior to moving to the UK. And I feel like once I moved to the UK and I was speaking, the language with, actual people, not just learning from books or TV shows or whatever, I feel like my language skills, I've progressed, obviously, but I've learned things that I couldn't have learned without these interactions for over the years. So how do you feel like your Japanese has changed or evolved, if at all?
I mean, it hasn't been a clear improvement, you could say. Like there's certain things I definitely learned, like especially food. That used to be one of my biggest like gaps in my knowledge. Is I never bothered to like go out of my way to try to learn because obviously food is a huge thing in Japan, and Japanese food as a genre is really broad, and so there's a ton of vocabulary and terms related to food and stuff that is used in Japanese, and that was kind of just a giant hole in my knowledge because I wasn't motivated to try to learn how to talk about all this food that I couldn't even eat. It's like I don't want to learn about food with like pictures and written descriptions, right? It's kind of not very motivating. So when I caught here, I didn't know even some basic stuff about how to talk about food. So that's gotten a lot better, and other little things here or there, like also just like geographical knowledge. I didn't live in Japan, so I didn't know the train lines or the geography, or I only knew the very most popular cities, by name. Whereas now I actually know, a lot more of the geography, how they're related to each other, like what the different vibes are and things like that. And so that also helps a lot with interacting with Japanese people, because a lot of times you're talking about places, where do you hang out, where should we go? And so knowing that helps a lot, but although it's not strictly linguistic knowledge.
It's more cultural knowledge, I guess.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
Although in a way, like the other day, a Japanese friend that I have told me that they went back and watched this video of me speaking Japanese from like 4 years ago, so before I moved to Japan, and they told me I sounded more Japanese in that video than I do now.
Oh, interesting. How come?
And mostly they talked about like something kind of about my pronunciation, like my voice. Like I think the thing is like, in a way, living in Japan has in certain ways reinforced my identity as like being a foreigner. Like not intentionally, it's not like I chose this, but when you live in Japan, there are a lot of times where when you're interacting with Japanese people that you end up experiencing, like you experience the fact that they really do view you as different from them, and you're kind of put into this box as a foreigner and treated differently. Sometimes not necessarily worse, sometimes you're treated even better because you're a foreigner a lot of the times, but there's definitely a lot of times where kind of you feel that they're viewing you as different and they're kind of othering you just in their head. And then you end up kind of othering yourself, like without even, realizing it when that happens. And so I think my identity as being not Japanese led me to sometimes not go out of my way to imitate Japanese mannerisms and like the specific little kind of like Japanese voice that they sometimes do as much. I think this is something I've been kind of thinking about because it's all subconscious. I didn't consciously decide to do this, but I think like, although I'm super comfortable speaking Japanese and I'm probably my overall fluency and like the effortlessness with I can talk and the topics I can talk about have increased. Something about my like maybe, the tone of my voice or something. Apparently they say my voice sounds more Englishy somehow. So it's something I want to fix, I guess, or improve. But yeah, there is that. Like overall, also like, when I didn't live in Japan, I felt more like I had to go out of my way to get lots of input and work on my Japanese. Because if I didn't make it happen, my environment wasn't going to make it happen. Whereas I guess moving to Japan, sometimes I guess I got kind of lazy. I'm like, well, I don't have to actively work on Japanese as much because it's just, it's part of my life now. But because of that, I don't, like in these last couple of years, I didn't go out of my way to get input in like more difficult materials. Like I didn't watch as much like intellectual material or read as many books. And so I think especially like if I'm just going to make a video talking about language learning, right? Maybe then I was almost like more on point a couple of years ago when I was like always reading books in Japanese and stuff. Whereas now, like everyday stuff, I'm super comfortable. But now it's just in the last like couple months, I started making content in Japanese. Now I'm like, okay, let me go and read more books again and try to get that extra, I guess intellectual touch on my Japanese and try to work on my the little rough edges of my pronunciation or whatever.
I mean, I feel like I can relate to that because when I was in the UK, the first 3 years, I was studying at university. So I was working full on at C2 level constantly, you know, speaking, listening, reading, whatever. And I feel like after that, I still lived in the UK and still had lots of interaction in English. But I feel like my level, I don't know if it went down, but I guess like now I would struggle a lot to write essays or even read research because I don't know, I'm not using these words. So, the knowledge of this type of knowledge kind of like dies down or like fades a little bit in your head.
I'm sure it would come back very quickly. Like it's still there somewhere, but it kind of, it's not as close to the surface, I guess.
I feel like you kind of relax more because, you don't have to work at C2 level all the time. You can just, in everyday life, B2, C1 is enough usually kind of thing. I think
for in all aspects of language learning, like a lot of it is, your brain rises to the challenges that it's given.
For sure.
And so like now that I'm starting to make videos in Japanese, and then I film the videos, I watch it back, I have to edit it and notice every single little mistake that I make and stuff. Now I'm naturally more motivated to try to work on that. But I guess because I wasn't doing that and mostly I was just using Japanese for everyday interactions, my level was totally fine. And also there was an aspect where before I moved to Japan, I only compared myself to like mostly I only compared myself to native speakers. But also when I would compare myself to other Japanese speaking foreigners, it would only be like the best of the best. Like I knew, I was the other people in the YouTube space. There's a couple other people, like Dogen or Ananya who speak like amazing Japanese. So I'd compare myself to them and feel like, oh yeah, I'm okay, but it's not like I'm like way better than everyone else. There's like a lot of people that are like really good. But then moved to Japan and I kind of had the experience of realizing that like 99% of foreigners are nowhere even close to my level of Japanese ability. And I'm like this crazy anomaly that almost every Japanese person I meet, they've never met a foreigner even close to as good at Japanese as me. And that also kind of made me get a little like lazy, I guess. Because it made me realize like, I'm already in like the 99.9th percentile. Like, what do I need to work so hard for? Because kind of you realize this, you have a more accurate sense of the standard. Although, again, like I said, now that I'm going back to try to make content, I still want to be like, because now I'm going to be talking about how to do language learning in Japanese for a Japanese audience of people wanting to learn English. So again, it's kind of like my Japanese ability is the proof of everything that I'm talking about, right? Like if you follow my instructions and you follow my method, then you can achieve what I've achieved. So I have to kind of be the example that it really works, right? So now I feel like, again, I still want to be like as good as I can possibly be.
Interesting. I feel like I can relate to a lot of things you say because I sometimes, even now, I know I'm definitely fluent in English. It's not perfect, but that's not, just being very good at something doesn't mean you're perfect at it. But I sometimes feel like my English is not good enough, or like I hear other people speak and I'm like, oh my God, I should be better. I've lived in the UK for 8 years. I've got like 2 masters, linguistics, whatever, like I've got the whole thing. And I think that comes down to like, in my case anyway, to like, I wouldn't say low self-confidence. I feel like I'm a pretty confident person, but sometimes, you get those moments of, I'm not good enough kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also sometimes I'm like you, I'm like, yeah, I don't have the best English, but I'm so much better than a lot of people. Yeah. But not in the sense like I'm better, like superior, but more like I've come a long way. I can chill now. I don't have to like, I could be better, but I'm okay now.
Yeah, still, It's like a balance because I think like I was talking to like a musician the other day who like, performs like plays an instrument professionally. And we were kind of talking about how in order to reach that highest level of performing, like I'm playing an instrument, you have to be constantly noticing all the flaws in the way that you play and improving on those flaws, right? And so because the way that you engage with the instrument is basically hyper focusing on all the tiny things you do wrong, naturally that's what you notice when you listen to, if you're going to listen to yourself play, you hear the little things that could be better. If you're not like that, then you're not going to reach that high level, right? Sure. If you're kind of able to reach a normal level and just be like, oh, I'm pretty good, then you're probably not going to become a true master. So I think it's a balance, right? It also depends on your goals, obviously, right? Like for language learning, a lot of times people don't need to have that high level, and so you can reach a certain level, and then all your needs are met, and then it makes sense to work on other goals in your life, right? Because obviously our time and energy is limited. But I think in a way that what you mentioned, right, is probably the reason why you did get this good is because you are in the habit of noticing all the flaws, and so in a way that mental habit is a good thing because it allows you to reach the level you've reached, but has this negative side of then you never feel as good about your own ability because when you hear yourself speak, you can't just turn off that habit of noticing all the things that could be even better,
That's a very good point. I had never thought about that. I guess it's something I needed to, like a mindset I needed to have. which served me then, but I feel like doesn't serve me as much now.
Yeah, like you said, it's like if you're at a certain stage of your life, you have other goals, then like, yeah, maybe it's now doing you less, it has more downsides than positive sides. So
yeah, because you can always work on something. I could, my accent could be better. I could sound a little bit less French, or whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm like, what is you? I think you mentioned that concept before, but like diminishing returns. Like at some,
they get really intense at this level.
Yeah.
Plus, I think especially with English, since it's such an international language now, like being good at English and sounding like a native speaker are like two things you can separate pretty easily, right? Because now, like having some remnant of a European accent, like people speak English with so many different accents now, you can't even say that that's that means your English isn't perfect in a way. Whereas with Japanese, because really only Japanese people speak it, you don't get as much leeway in that sense of like if they can detect a foreign accent, then that immediately puts you in that box of like a not native speaker. Of course, even if you do have perfect Japanese, a lot of the times because of your looks, you're going to get put in that box anyway. But of course, like you can, like the situations in which you can spend time outside of that box increase, the better that your like Japanese is. So I feel like there's a good argument for it being more worthwhile to work hard on your accent in a language like Japanese than a language like English.
Well, a question that I had was, I get the importance of input, hearing and reading tons of the language before expecting to produce it. That's kind of how it works. You hear lots of examples of a language and then you're able to produce it eventually. But I feel like, especially with the Japanese, I find speaking to be the hardest part. Granted, that's hard for any language, I would say. But for Japanese, for me, it's more like, putting things in the right order, everything is, it's quite difficult when you go from a European language to Asian language, as you would know. So how would you, what kind of advice would you give to someone that's trying to bridge the gap between, you've listened to a lot of the language and now you want to produce it, but it's hard. So what do you do?
Well, I mean, of course, it has to be said that obviously listen more is like another way to get even more input. Probably a lot of people still underestimate how much input it really takes. But if you want actual advice, as everyone's already heard that piece before.
It's also for me because I'm interested as well.
Like I think a big part of it is like you said, maybe this might even be more challenging if somebody has succeeded in learning other European languages or languages similar to English, because it's you kind of have this idea of I figured out how to do this. I know how to learn another language and learn how to speak a foreign language. And then that method for those languages just breaks down with Japanese, right? So I think in a way, maybe for me, when I learned Japanese, I'd never learned another language before, so I didn't have any expectations, right? So maybe that actually helped me. But I think, it's a different process because you're not only learning how to speak another language, you have to learn a new way to think. I think that's actually the big problem. Like if you think about, like I've been thinking more and more, like the more that I use ChatGPT and learn about large language models, the more I keep thinking more and more that it's like the perfect metaphor for how our brains work. So you know how when you use ChatGPT, the prompt you use totally changes the output, right? If you use poor prompts, you get poor output. If you have like really good prompts, then you can get really good output out of it. So the quality of your prompt is almost as important as the quality of the model itself. So I think you could think of it as when you get input in Japanese and you learn to understand Japanese, you're building a model for Japanese in your head. And then when you go to speak, you're prompting that model for output, right? So in a way, a lot of people, the whole process is subconscious. They don't realize you're doing this. But whenever you try to think of anything, you're essentially prompting your brain for output. And so the kind of like prompt that most people use is they have some thought they're used to expressing in English and they want to express like, I'm from America or something, right? And then they go to prompt their brain and say like, how do I say I'm from America in Japanese? The thing is, Japanese people might not say that. Right? They'll express that base idea of they'll express where they're from, but they may not say it they might not formulate the concepts in that sort of construction, right? Sometimes the way they formulate the concepts are very different. And so even though you might have the quote unquote correct Japanese or the Japanese that would be the natural way to express the like base idea you want to express in your brain, because you prompt it with the English thought, nothing comes out. Because Japanese people might not say that English thought in Japanese. So if you change the way you prompt your brain and make it more like, okay, what would a Japanese person say in this sort of situation to express this sort of thing on kind of like a more like meta level, then sometimes stuff will actually come to you when it wouldn't come otherwise. And so, of course, at the beginning, it's going to be really slow. And with everything in output, like every time you say something, it gets more automatic and gets easier to say it. So I especially have been feeling this recently because there's certain things in Japanese that I've like certain stories that I've told like a billion times, right? Like I have this story about how I like got this hotel that I thought was going to be like $100 a night, and it was because I was new to Japan. I wasn't used to how many zeros there were, and it ended up being $1,000 a night. Like I have this story that, but when I tell the story when I'm like with friends or whatever, like I have this whole way I build it up and then tell it it's funny. And I've told that story in Japanese like a bunch of times. The other day I told it in English I don't know if it was the first time, but at least the first time in a long time. And it was literally harder to tell the story in English because I'm so used to telling it in Japanese. I have like particular wordings that I've, honed. Almost like when I think we all have this. It's like, just like how stand-up comedians, will do the same routine every night and like tweak the wording until they find out what gets the best reaction. We all have our stories that we tell new people that we meet, and we kind of have like worked out our version that like gets the most laughs or whatever. So like there's something that I've done in Japanese, and then in English it's actually harder because I haven't been to that same process. So that again reinforced for me recently how much of output ability is also contextual, right? So a lot of it too is that if you've like even in for my native language in English, and I think I'm pretty good at speaking English, right? I speak English a lot for my job too. Even then, if I've never expressed something in English ever before, when the first time I go to say it, I'm having Japanese thoughts come up, and I'm having to think, how do I say this in English? And it's that process, right? Whereas if I explain a third time or fourth time, it gets easier and easier as I kind of find the English ways to express that concept. So the way I think about it is like sometimes, you have to find the way to express the concepts in a Japanese like way, and it's different than just thinking in English and then trying to translate the English into Japanese, right? It's this other kind of more meta process of thinking about what do people do say in Japanese, and how do I piece those things Japanese people actually say into a construction that gets the more important meaning across,
I guess it kind of comes down to this idea of avoiding translation as much as possible. Yeah. So I know like that's something that's kind of obvious to me because I speak other languages, and they're not extremely different from one another, but you still phrase things differently. Yeah. It's not like language is obviously not just one sentence in your native language, which you translate into a new language. It's about knowing, well, ideally, when you reach a certain level, to be able to phrase things in a way that sounds natural, smooth, etc., etc. And actually, for example, when I use ChatGPT, automatically instead of saying, how do you say, quote, this sentence, I say, how do you express the idea, or like when you feel upset, or something more conceptual, And then ChatGPT can give you ideas. I mean, we can maybe have a discussion about ChatGPT.
So again, that's like a really good prompt. Like use that same prompt for your own brain. It's almost like, when you're doing brainstorming, you kind of just, you're kind of, that's what you're doing, right? You're prompting your brain, seeing what comes up. And so I guess to, like kind of combine those two ideas, like have that mindset of changing the prompt for your brain and remember that it's very contextual. So if there's something that you, like for me, what I will do for Japanese is sometimes I'll have the opposite experience of what I just said. I'll try to explain something in Japanese I've never explained before. And I'm at the level where even if it's right off the cuff and I've never talked about it before, I can still get the point across, but sometimes it's not as elegant as I would have thought. And I have that sense of like, I feel like I can explain this so much better in English. So a lot of times what I'll do after that is I'll go home and kind of sit down and think, how can I express this idea in Japanese, that same kind of story or thought that I had. And then I'll be slow. I'll kind of tell my brain, okay, like I'll just think like, what are there any Japanese expressions that kind of mean a similar thing to that? Or like, how could I say that? And I'll kind of like let stuff come. And then also when you do that, then I'll be going and watching a Japanese TV show and they'll say something that is like a really good way to say that, right? I remember the other day I was listening to some Japanese talk and they used the word training wheels in Japanese, and I was like it was in a language learning context of saying like subtitles are good training wheels or something like in Japanese. I was like, oh, that's really good wording. I'm gonna like use that wording too. So then once I kind of like I construct a better way to say it, then I know next time I go to say it in Japanese it's gonna be smoother, and then the time after that it's gonna be smoother. So yeah, I guess just kind of viewing the whole thing as a process, and that's how I kind of like approach that process.
I feel like I do something similar. So the other day I went to Zundoya Ramen. Have you probably been to that place?
Yeah.
I love it. So there was like some ramens you could choose from, and there was one that I liked because the topping was, the toppings I wanted, but you couldn't add individual toppings, I think. Anyway, and it was spicy, and I tried to say like basically, spicy is dangerous for me as a joke. I know it's not how you would phrase it. I was like, karai wa abunai, and understood. After that, I went on ChatGPT and I asked, how could I express, that I want this dish, but I don't want it spicy, and then they gave me like a phrasing, and then hopefully I will be able to use that later on. So I feel like you kind of build up your knowledge based on times where you failed or didn't meet the standards you wanted to express that thing, I guess. That can be, I think, quite a good way to learn. One of the ways, maybe not the only way, but that can
and of course, like a lot of these things do just come naturally. Like basically what I'm doing now is like when I end up, I get this question and then I'm giving an answer that's like pretty thorough. And it sounds like there's like the step-by-step process. But in reality, when I learned to speak Japanese, I was still going through these steps, but it was all kind of just happening naturally and in real time and kind of almost unconsciously. So I'm kind of like, I think for some people, output comes very naturally. For other people, they really struggle with it. And I think what's really happening is when it comes to learning how to speak in a new language, especially Japanese, where you have to learn a new way of thinking, some people, the process of learning a new way of thinking comes to them more intuitively than other people. For me, it came pretty intuitively, but I've been realizing through working with students that some people have to kind of figure out that process. It doesn't just come automatically to them. So I'm kind of like reverse engineering what I did naturally in real time without even really realizing I was doing it. That's kind of what I'm explaining. But I just kind of want to emphasize that like once you get the hang of it, it's not a like step-by-step process where you're like, step one, I'm going to think about the concept. Like it starts to just happen naturally. But if you pay attention to what you're doing in the moment, that's kind of what's actually going on.
Yeah, trying to be more conscious of the process, I guess. So, sorry, the video cut out, but it's fine. It's more of a podcast anyway, I guess. So another question that I wanted to ask you, it's a reference of like a brief interaction we had on Twitter. So basically, I remember that on Twitter, I was sort of talking about how I wanted to do the JLPT N4 exam. For those that don't know, it's the proficiency exam for Japanese. And you said something basically, you don't really see the point of doing the JLPT exam below N2 level. And I guess my question is, don't you think the JLPT can be a good like metric to measure progress? If you're like learning Japanese casually, or if maybe you think there's another way you can measure progress, or should you measure progress? All that, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the people who made the JLPT, I think it was made by Japanese people that they've never like learned Japanese, right? And they're thinking about it from a business context, right? Like the JLPT is mostly about getting a qualification that will show a Japanese company that you have a certain level of ability that you can be expected to be able to function in a workplace in a certain way, right? So hypothetically, if your goal is purely to use Japanese in a work environment, then you could say, okay, then the JLPT levels like N4, N5, N3, you could say they mark how far down you are on the path to speaking business Japanese. That's at least what the goal is to set out, right? And so if that's your goal, my goal is to reach a high level of business Japanese, then follow that path that the JLPT lays out. Maybe that's a good path. But if you're learning Japanese for fun, then why are you using a path that's designed to get you to business Japanese as your roadmap, right? If your goal is probably going to be more like, I want to be able to watch content that I like and interact with Japanese friends, that's going to be, your goal is different, which means the whole path is going to be different, right? So why not just start down that path from the beginning? And then to add an additional point, even though the JLPT is designed to be a path to get business Japanese, I think the path itself is poorly created, right? Like when you look at the vocabulary and the grammar patterns or whatever that they have you learn at each level, you have to know for each level. They don't even probably align very well, even if that was your goal. But then for people that don't even have that goal, they're not even planning on using Japanese for business. Why are they? The curriculum doesn't meet your match your goals at all. So it doesn't make any sense to me to follow that curriculum. Now, I understand if you actually need the certification to get a job, then it makes sense. Even then, I wouldn't mostly study for the JLPT, because the thing is, if you get good at Japanese, you'll be able to pass the JLPT. If you actually get to the point where you can pull a Japanese book off the shelf and read it, JLPT N1 will be easy for you. And I know lots of people that have passed it, have gotten almost perfect scores, they never studied for it. So for the most part, that's why I also think that why study for a test when you can just, real life is the real test, right? Just learn from real life. And if you actually get good at, if you actually just focus on watching the shows you want to watch and reading the books you want to read, you'll be able to pass the test. So why not just do that, And so, basically, the other point I was going to make is so if you need to pass the certification, for my number one advice, as long as you don't have a super limited time scale, is just get good at Japanese. You'll be able to pass the test later. If you have a limited time scale, then maybe you do want to add a little bit of actual JLPT study. But the only times where the certification is actually going to help you get a job is N2 or N1. There's no job that having N4 is going to allow you to get. And so like that whole I need to do it for an actual career reason isn't applicable. So then that's why N2 and N1, I still, for some people it makes sense for career reasons, but it's like N4 is not going to help you with your career. You're probably not learning for a business reason anyway, so it just makes no sense to make that the basis of your curriculum, your learning curriculum, I guess.
But if I'm playing devil's advocate, wouldn't it be like still a nice sort of goal to go towards when like kind of like it's better than nothing kind of thing? Because like I'm guessing, I'm not a specialist of the N1 obviously, but like I'm guessing a lot of the stuff you will learn will still be useful to real life. I mean, it's going to be mostly formal, I'm guessing. I don't think they go with casual Japanese that much, but could you argue that possibly?
I think that some people just really can't let go of the JLPT, right? And it's to the point where, like, even I know you're just playing devil's advocate, but people who say that, what I hear is this, like, I really want it to make sense for me to study for the JLPT. Like, can you help me come up with a rationalization for why the JLPT makes sense? I'm like, well, where does this desire to make the JLPT make sense come from? And I think it just comes from our schooling system of like
wanting culture, kind of.
Yeah, like wanting a clear external authority to tell us whether we're succeeding or not, right? If people aren't in the habit, because we grew up in a schooling system and we weren't really self-guided in the way we went through our initial education, I think people aren't comfortable setting their own standards for success. They want someone else's standards for success. But if you can find a way to let go of that, you can make your whole learning process a lot more fun by just setting your own standards. Like for me, now I've been learning Chinese. Like there's shows that I want to watch in China. Like I have a bunch of shows that I've watched with like subtitles and stuff, like English subtitles. And I'm like, it would be, this show seems really cool. It'd be really cool to be able to understand it with no subtitles, right? Or I know I'm looking forward to one day reading books in Chinese that are all in kanji, right? Or being able to hear, like when I hear Chinese tourists in Japan speaking Mandarin, I wish I could understand more and jump into their conversation. Like I naturally have all these little goals. Some of them are going to take more time than others. So I know, like I always know whether I'm getting better because I'm always going back and rewatching things I watched at different points in time, and I can see how much my comprehension has progressed. Every once in a while I'll have an opportunity to speak Chinese. I can tell how much I progressed. And then I have all these natural kind of like landmarks that I'm looking forward to passing one day. So for me, like, I don't think it's actually hard to tell whether you're progressing or not, right? If you're engaged with the process. And most people they naturally have a goal. They have things they want to do, or if you don't, it's easy to come up with them. So I just don't really see any need for some external standard like this. Just if you're just learning for your own purposes,
So your take is more that you kind of go for something a bit more unstructured, if I may say. In my mind, I guess an exam is structured.
Yeah.
So would you go for something more like that, but then every now and then notice your progress when you, for example, you're reading a book and you understand more than you could before?
I think effective language learning is inherently unstructured because, like, and if you want to be making fast progress, you have to be engaged with native input, right? That native input could come from content. It could come from other live human beings. But either way, when you're engaged with that content, like you don't know what order you're going to learn things, right? Sometimes your brain just picks up on a certain word early on, even though objectively it's lower frequency, right? Sometimes it takes your brain a little longer to learn some of the high frequency. There's a lot of random stuff, and it depends on what randomly happens, right? Sometimes like a certain scene just has a big emotional impact on you. You end up easily remembering the words in those scenes, right? So inherently with like effective language learning, there's a lot of randomness and spontaneity that happens in that process. And so I think if you're trying to force onto it like some kind of structure of like, here's a list of words I'm going to learn them in this order, like that arbitrary structure actually holds you back,
Well, thank you for answering those questions. I wanted to go through some of the questions that people have asked on Instagram and on Twitter. This one is interesting. I wonder what you think. So someone, I think there was Malma_506, asked, how much progress would I miss out on if I immersed with non-comprehensible input?
It depends on how literally you're taking that like non-comprehensible to mean. So if it's truly not like incomprehensible, like I think the extreme would be you're listening to a podcast in a language that you're brand new to, and there's no visual component. Like you're gonna understand zero. You could listen to that for 1,000 years. You're never gonna learn the language, right? You might acquire most of the sound system, and get to the point you can parse the syllable boundaries and word boundaries pretty well, but the meaning has to come from somewhere, right? So if you have no access to any of the meaning, then there's no way for your brain to figure out how the language actually works, right?
Especially without context, which is kind of like a podcast. You don't see anything, you just hear.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're if you're being strict, then like if you were only watching or listening, getting incomprehensible input, you're never going to learn. Your learning rate's going to be at 0, which means you can do it for an infinite amount of time. You're never going to learn. Probably what this person more means is like, let's say I just watch anime with no subtitles, right? So in reality, if you just watch a random anime with no subtitles, a lot is going to be comprehensible, right? There is a lot you can pick up because of the visuals and the sound effects and the emotion. You can see these characters, they're interacting with each other, they have facial expressions. Actually, a lot is going to be comprehensible. So if you're talking about like that, then you will, like, you can just watch anime with no subtitles. I think eventually you will get fluent in Japanese, but obviously it's going to be a lot slower than content that's more comprehensible. Something like the content people make, like comprehensible input Japanese, or the input that was designed to be comprehensible. If you're
more level appropriate, basically, I guess, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you combine the kind of like less comprehensible input with like learning vocabulary or like learning grammar or something, not that this is necessarily what I recommend, but if you choose to do that, then you're going to progress pretty quickly, and maybe the difference won't be that big between that and comprehensible input content. If you're only doing immersion and there's no active learning component, then the more comprehensibility and speed of progress are going to be like directly correlated. And I think you're going to improve significantly more quickly with input that's more comprehensible.
I guess it comes down to not using just one way of learning. If you watch content, so input, then you do Anki, let's say, and you do a bit of reading up on the grammar whenever it comes up, then I guess that can be kind of I don't know if it's wholesome, but like a holistic, let's say, approach to...
I mean, that's like what I would recommend, and that's what I'm doing for Chinese. I mean, so have you ever heard of this resource called Comprehensible Input Japanese?
Not this one, no.
So it basically it started off, I think, with one person, but then she's like hired more people now. It's gotten a little bigger, but it's basically this service where they just have hundreds of hours of comprehensible input content in Japanese, sorted into different levels. And at the very beginning level, they're assuming you know literally nothing. So, but they use visuals and techniques so that you can tell roughly what's being said and like pick it up just by watching. So if you use that content, which is very strategically designed to be comprehensible right from the beginning, you could just watch that and get to like a high intermediate level, and then probably eventually start just naturally transition to native content. And I think that would work. So like, if you have input that's comprehensible enough, then that's all you need. It could take you all the way there. I think the thing is, when you watch that comprehensible input content at the beginning, because you don't have a lot of work with in terms of language ability, they end up being really boring videos, right? Like I watch them in Chinese a lot, like these videos that are designed to be comprehensible. And sometimes I enjoy them. I mean, sometimes the fact that you're understanding the language itself is enjoyable.
Yeah,
right?
It's quite cool, isn't it?
Yeah. So I still enjoy it, but I can't watch these videos of someone, speaking super slowly and super clearly about their trip to Japan. I can't watch that for 3 hours a day. I kind of tap out after 30 minutes. So I still do that. And then I will go and watch like native content and understand less. But then I also learn words in Anki, so that helps me. The fact that I know what these words mean makes the native content more comprehensible than it would be. So I kind of have this, I do both. The actual comprehensible input content, that's still probably the most efficient way to learn. But because before you're at a higher, level, it's just generally the content itself is so boring that you can only do it so much. So then I still use a lot of native content too.
Yeah, and you want to keep yourself engaged. So if you're bored, then obviously language learning kind of, gets worse essentially. Someone else asked, Joey Rosa 31. So what's one thing, Matt, so you, love about Japan that America doesn't have?
A lot of things. I mean, like izakayas and stuff. Like, I mean, restaurants that are like cheap and original, and I mean, I guess they have them too. Just in Japan, the number of restaurants is crazy. So I really like how like even just in my neighborhood, I can go to like a different restaurant every night for like over a month, and I can go to a new restaurant like every night, and that's even in like my small neighborhood. And it's like on average more healthy even when you're eating out than in America, and the portions are like make sense. Like you can easily order the right portion, so you don't have like to either eat too much or like bring a bag of food home, and it's like really cheap. And so like the food culture I absolutely love here. Also just the train system, that like I don't like to drive, so the fact that I feel no need at all for a car, I can take the trains and get around everywhere, I really like. I mean, there's probably a million more things, but like, and the konbinis, the fact that like there's konbinis everywhere, and that basically means that like, like I really like how if like a friend decides to spend the night at my place, everything that you'd need you can go get toothbrush. If it's a girl, you can get makeup remover or whatever. Like right at the store, you can go get food anytime. Like the fact that pretty much no matter where you are, you can walk like less than 5 minutes and get a kombini with like literally everything you need. And even like Band-Aids, medical stuff. Like they have at least a couple options of pretty much everything you need in your life for the most part at the kombini.
Especially at 2 a.m. when you for example, when I go home after karaoke night, then it's nice to be able to grab some food. And
like when I went back to America and I'm like staying at my parents' house, and it's like a 30-minute walk to the closest store, and that's normal. You know, like that convenience of everything being close together is just, like, it really improves your quality of life.
Yeah. Do you want to swap? Because I know you have the light in your face. I'm happy to swap.
It was really good up until a second ago.
Yeah. we just, working with what we have here.
Yeah, I should it's been almost like on my list to like come up with more things about I like about Japan, because it's a question you get asked all the time, but like just now that was like a very unoriginal answer. So I'm always like...
No, but I mean, that makes sense. But also I feel like when you live in a place for a long time, you kind of take for granted things a little bit. Sure. So you forget what's good, It's only when you go back to your home country, they're like, oh my God, that was actually amazing.
Yeah, like I remember when last time I went back was in December. I went back to America for a couple of weeks. For like the month after that, I could answer that question really well because it was right on top of my mind.
Fresh,
like, here are all the things that are amazing about Japan that I missed when I was in America. Now I've been back for like 6 months. So I'm like, what are all the things that suck about America?
What was that again? So Japanese mentor on Twitter asks, can you say a sentence in Kansai Ben? And I think they said nande yane is off the table.
I mean, yeah, I don't claim to speak Kansai Ben, but actually me and my girlfriend were just making a joke that like how in Osaka the train announcements should like be in like Osaka Ben.
I guess
I was saying something. So what was like saying like 次、心斎橋やで、足元気つけや. That'd be really funny.
Someone called Monsieur Carfaneum, don't ask me to pronounce that in English. After reaching a decent level in the language, if you haven't acquired some aspects of the pronunciation like pitch accent, how far could you get with just getting input and focusing on your deficiency? In this case, is there anything that should be done on top of input? And I guess that the person asked if basically they were asking about the difference between focusing on everything early on versus just learning, kind of going YOLO, I guess, and then picking up on the stuff you haven't learned later on. That's how I understood it.
If you've reached a decent level at the language, then all you're doing is input, probably no matter if you're not doing anything active to fix your pronunciation, it's not going to change almost at all. I mean, I guess this person is talking about, can I consciously pay attention to it? But if you just think about the case of most immigrants in a country, once they reach fluency, the pronunciation will be at a certain level, and then they can literally live in that country for decades, speak the language every single day, get input every single day. Pronunciation pretty much never changes.
That's true.
Right? There's lots of people you can see, like foreigners who've been in Japan, who've been on Japanese TV for decades, and you can compare the way they speak now to like the way they speak 2 decades ago, and they sound exactly the same. And so pronunciation is one of the first things that develops when you're learning a language. And the whole language is built on top of the sound system, right? So the sound system that you developed, like when you first kind of reach a basic level of fluency, unless you actively do some change to change the way that you hear the language, change the way you speak the language, input alone is probably going to do very little. And if you just try to pay attention to something, you might pick up some stuff. But the thing is, like, how are you going to know whether you're perceiving it correctly or not? In a lot of ways, like with pitch accent, for example, or actually take a step back, like in the field of like linguistics, or like second language acquisition in particular, there's this technique called high variability phonetic training that has a lot of research behind it and has been getting researched for a couple decades now.
What is that? I don't think I've heard of it.
So it's basically a way to train your brain to hear sounds that you can't perceive accurately. And it's really simple. Basically, they will play, like, let's say a Japanese person wants to learn how to hear the difference between L and R. Then either an L sound or an R sound will get played. Like, I mean, in that case, it's a consonant, so it will be like they'll say either right or light. Like, they'll play these minimal pairs. Japanese people have 2 options. They have to pick which one they heard, and then they'll immediately get feedback on whether they were correct or not. And if you just do this over and over, it's just like a quiz game, right? Like, you hear the sound, you guess what you think you heard, and then you get the immediate feedback. If you just do this over and over, your ability to hear the sounds gets better and better. Now, what the research has shown is that this training, in order for it to be effective, it needs to have variability. That's why they call it high variability phonetic training, which means that within the training data, you have to have many different speakers of different, men and women, different ages, different maybe like, subtle different like regional like regional aspect dialects or different emotional states and stuff like that. Okay. If you only train on one person pronouncing it really clearly, it won't transfer to like the language at large, right? You'll just learn how to hear that. Like your brain's always lazy, so it's always going to do the minimum. So if you only train on one person, it's only going to learn how to hear the difference between L and R for that one speaker, right? Or if you only use men, it's only going to learn how to hear men, right? So if you want to be able to just hear the language at large, you need to have a large variability in the training data. And once you can hear it, then like the research shows it's not a one-to-one, but also naturally your production improves a lot as well. So for example, with pitch accent, most people can't hear it. So there's actually a website called kotsu.to made by this guy that I know. It's like it's pretty well known in the Japanese community. So it's a really good website. Basically just implements this technique for pitch accent. So it will play you a word out of context, and then it will give you an option of 2 different pitch accent patterns, and you have to pick which one you just heard, and then it immediately tells you whether you were right or wrong. Okay. So if you just do this over and over, then you'll become able to hear the pitch accent patterns. And in the online community that I run, I recommend people do this, and people are always posting statistics of like, hey, when I started, I was at 60% accuracy. Today, for the first time, I hit like 90% or 95% for my whole session, you know? So people can, you get better linearly when you do this training. And once you can hear it, then now your brain has learned to perceive a new category of information it wasn't ignoring before. So now when you get input, you're actually like, once you reach that point, then maybe just getting input alone, your pitch accent will start getting better because now your brain is actually hearing distinctions it wasn't hearing before. So, your brain is basically like a large language model that you're training through input. But if you can't hear a certain category, then like that it's almost like it didn't exist, right? That information isn't getting stored anywhere in your model. Whereas once you can hear it, then it is getting stored. So if you're like me when I learned Japanese and you have a long history of speaking Japanese with the wrong pitch accent, then that alone probably still won't be enough, because the thing is every time you speak, you're reinforcing your old version of the pronunciation. And that includes reading. Even when you're reading, you're reinforcing the old one. So every time you output, you're generating bad information, bad data for your model, right? Input, you get good input, now you're feeding your model good data, and then every time you read or speak, you're feeding your model bad data. A lot of times it just cancels each other out. So like what I had to do was learn the pitch accent rules so that I could make sure that whenever I spoke, I used the right pitch accent. And now all the data that's getting fed is good data because the native input's good data. And now I'm using these rules to make sure I only generate good data, right? And that helped my model over time accumulate a massive, made the good data outweigh the old bad data. And then now, now I'm at the point where if I just speak without thinking, I have 90% pitch accuracy. If I make sure I think about the rules, I can get to 99% accuracy on a good day, So, and then maybe now that my brain's collecting more data and I have cleaned this up, maybe now in 10 years from now, I'll have 99% accuracy even without thinking. Cause now I've set up all the conditions for my model for new data to allow to accumulate in my model. But going back to the question, if you're just being I'm going to pay attention to pitch accent, but you don't have any feedback anywhere in the system, you didn't do the high variability phonetic training, then you're probably nothing's going to happen, right? You need that initial step of doing something with the feedback so that your brain can actually know when it's hearing it, when it's not hearing it, so that it can figure out what it actually is. And then once you've kind of unlocked that perceptual aspect, then after that input will continue to probably improve your model, basically.
I like this analogy of treating our brain like a language model. I think that's
really helpful.
Analogy, yeah.
Actually, there's this field of linguistics that I've been learning a lot about called usage-based linguistics, which views it's kind of like a counterpoint to the Chomskyan perspective of we were born with language instinct. It's basically saying, okay, we're born with cognitive infrastructure, but basically a clean slate in terms of knowledge. It's kind of the equivalent of when you start training a large language model. The algorithm is there, but it doesn't know anything. It just has an algorithm that's going to change how it responds to data, and then you feed it the data. So it's saying basically our brain is the same thing. We have certain learning algorithms and stuff, but ultimately when we start learning language, we don't know anything about grammar or anything like that. We just basically take statistics on all the patterns that we have, and grammar and vocabulary and higher level things kind of emerge as basically statistical patterns in the input the data that our brain was fed. So you could think of it as feeding your brain good tokens, your model will get better, then you'll speak better. If you feed the well is kind of poisoned with bad tokens that you make from forcing output early on and saying things native wouldn't say, then now you're negatively biasing all the statistics of your model. And sometimes you can create self-reinforcing negative loops where every time you use the language, you're reinforcing bad patterns that ultimately cancel out the new patterns. And that's why I think that's basically what I currently view as fossilization, is when the bad patterns that you've made the statistical equilibrium of the good tokens and the bad tokens makes you land wherever you land. And now, unless you have some kind of conscious intervention, input alone can't basically overpower the bad tokens you're constantly like adding to your statistical model.
Yeah, it's just like internalized, so you don't even think about it. You just, I don't know, your brain believes that's how you say things, for example, and then it's how until someone points it out that, you know, it's hard to notice that you've been doing it wrong, essentially.
Yeah, like the brain's always trying to be very efficient, right? Yeah. So like part of this, the view of the brain is that there's also this just broader model of how the brain works called predictive processing, which is basically saying our brain's constantly making predictions about what we're about to experience, and then when the experience that we have aligns with what we predicted, then our current model gets more reinforced. And when we experience something that contradicted our expectations or our predictions, then that's when the model updates. Right? It's actually the same with like LLMs, right? That's how they're trained. And so what can happen is if your brain deems some aspect of the language as not being helpful in making predictions, it'll sometimes just tune that down and basically learn to ignore it. Right? So if like early on you learn a lot through reading, and your brain gets really good at using like, you know, context and lexical information to be able to tell what's being said, then maybe even if your brain hasn't learned how to like pick out certain like aspects of the sounds, like make use of certain phonetic cues like pitch accent, early on your brain's just like, well, so far this isn't really helping us make any predictions, so I guess it's just noise, and then it just turns it down, and then you don't notice it anymore. And then until you have some kind of intervention to change that, like the high variability phonetic training, then it just reinforces itself, because even though you're getting the input, like there's that aspect I just said of sometimes if your output is bad, you're literally adding bad statistics. But there's also aspects where your brain will just learn to tune out certain aspects, so they're just not even getting recorded, you know?
Mieki asked the question, so why does Matt push avoiding reading early on as a general rule? It's what many enjoy the most, and spending hundreds of hours on something less motivating just to sound a certain way feels contrary to his old message about there being no payoff to language learning aside from enjoyment.
So basically, one thing that I believe really strongly now is if you have two people and one of them learns all through listening until, you know, maybe like B1 level, and then after that learns how to read and write and things like that, versus somebody that learns how to read and write alongside listening, and they, I don't know, have like a 50-50 reading listening input diet, and we're also assuming they're not doing any like very active work to do your pronunciation, like the type of stuff that I'm talking about. The person that learns all through listening is going to end up with a much more natural native like accent than the person that had the reading and listening approach. And I actually kind of already in my last question kind of worked nicely. I kind of explained a lot of the reasoning behind this, right? One, because whenever you're reading, you're sub-vocalizing, you have this voice in your head, and if you don't already have a perfect accent, then you're mispronouncing everything in your head, and that's adding data, like those are adding bad tokens to your model that is going to bias your model. And there's also the aspect where then when you learn through reading, you're making your brain very good at being able to predict, you know, what words are going to come next, or what things mean and things like that, in spite of not having all the phonetic information, right? Like a lot of language is actually redundant. And that's why, you know, when someone's talking you can talk to somebody on the phone and the connection can be a little bit bad, you can still pretty much understand what they're saying. Because language is redundant, you can fill in a lot of the blanks and still figure things out. And so a lot of times people, they won't develop when you're reading early on, what can happen is your brain isn't forced to develop basically a perfected system for making full use of the phonetics, right? There's a lot of really subtle like phonetic information and like tuning that native speakers can use to understand when they're listening. But if you learn through reading, then you gain the ability to maybe like your brain can't perfectly parse all the sounds, but you can still understand pretty much everything because you have like the lexical information and other information you learn through reading. So there's like both of those elements that lead to people who basically learn all through listening, in the long run having like a better accent. Obviously, you don't want to be illiterate forever. Eventually, you want to read. But I mean, if you put it simply, like follow the order. If you want to get native-like results, do what natives do, which is first learn how to listen, then speak, then read, then write. That's like the most natural order, and that's what if replicating that will more naturally get you closer to a native speaker. So then this person, it kind of seems like they're already I guess, on board with this assumption, or at least they're asking this question from that perspective, but saying like, okay, even if that's the case, is it still justified to avoid reading if you prefer reading over listening?
Yeah, what if it's fun for you, kind of thing?
Yeah. So
sorry, the camera cut again. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. So it depends on who you are and what your goals are, right? So I would say in my case, right? So like, let's say you're learning Japanese, right? So I'm assuming if you want to reach a high level of fluency, well, then you must be planning on using Japanese a lot. Because if you're not planning on using Japanese a lot, why invest all the like hundreds, probably thousands of hours of time it takes to reach fluency, right? So, if you maybe now you're in your 20s or your 30s or even in your 40s, right? If you get fluent in Japanese, you're going to be using Japanese for a couple decades, right? Like I know for me, I'm probably going to be using Japanese for, let's say I live to be like 80, right? That's like, 5 more decades or something, right? So all those times I'm going to be, how many hours am I going to be spending speaking to Japanese people in Japanese? Like probably thousands of hours more, right? Mm-hmm. And so by spending a couple hundred hours up front, I can then spend a couple decades with better Japanese. It sounds like a good trade-off for me, right? But that's in my case, that's because I'm planning on using Japanese for a couple decades, right? So that's why I feel like, I didn't learn Japanese this way. I did reading from the beginning because I didn't know about everything that I'm just saying. But if I could go back, I totally would have delayed reading, even if it made the whole process take a little longer, even if it made it a little more of an uphill battle, a little more tiresome. Not necessarily that I think it would, but even if hypothetically we take that as a given, I'd still think for me it would be worth it, because then getting to speak Japanese and sound more like a native speaker every single day for most days for the rest of my life, which is still going to be multiple decades long, that's like a super good deal, right? So it depends on what your goals are. If your goals are like, I'm going to learn Japanese for next year, and then next year I'm going to go on one trip to Japan, and after that I'm going to leave and probably never use Japanese again, well then yeah, it probably doesn't make sense to do that, right? So it totally depends on your goals, but I think it's good to have a very long time scale in language learning. Like right now for me, and I'm learning Chinese, I just turned 30 a couple months ago. My goal is to, when I'm like 45, have my Chinese level be like roughly caught up to my Japanese level, So that's a really large time scale, right? And then I still can have a couple decades of speaking Japanese and Chinese and English all at like a near native level fluency. That's like my language learning life plan, like right now. So like, I think language learning takes such a long time. If you want to maximize your chances of success, that's the time scale you should have ideally is the rest of your life when you're planning these things out. And so yeah, on that time scale, delaying reading for like 1 year or like a couple hundred hours, maybe 1,000 hours, maybe even 2,000 hours, right? Could be a really good deal in a lot of cases. And again, not that you can't go back and fix your accent, you can, but developing a bad accent and going back and fixing it is actually is a lot more work than just developing the right one the first time and like waiting to read. And the other thing is, learning through listening can be fun. Like in your native language, you listen every day, right? You learn your native language through listening. So, there's probably lots of good shows that you can enjoy through listening and stuff too. And there's also lots of techniques that can make shows more comprehensible. That's what I've been like talking and exploring a lot now recently. So especially with AI, unlocks a lot of possibilities. So yeah, I think it's not that bad. Overall, I think there's a lot of benefits to learning through listening, especially because when you put all of your like EXP points into learning how to developing your listening abilities early on, then your ability to pick up new language through listening as a meta skill itself develops a lot more quickly and gets a lot further. And because of that, then, it's a lot easier to rack up hours passively than actively. So you can, once you develop this meta skill of being able to pick up new language through listening, because you put all your points into that, now whenever you're doing passive listening, you're going to be able to pick up more than you would have in the other scenario where you're doing like listening and reading hybrid. And because of that, you start to get this, like what happens to most people in that sense is they feel like they can only learn a new word when they see it written down. And really they do the vast majority of growing their vocabulary through reading, and listening is mostly just playing catch up to their reading ability. So if you can like break out of that frame and get to the frame where you can push your cutting edge forward just through like listening to podcasts, that unlocks a lot more possibilities, because you can fill in all the cracks of your day with passive listening and then still be growing your vocabulary all the time and stuff. So I don't even necessarily think it's slower, like to reach basic fluency that way. up, and initially it's slower, but once you get past that point where you can really hear the sounds really clearly, then at that point I actually think progress is going to be really fast.
That makes sense, yeah. Oh my God, there's so many things I wish we could talk about, like ChatGPT, and I mean AI in general would be so interesting, but we're not going to do a 3-hour interview, otherwise I will die. But I want to go for a last question. Okay, maybe if we do 2 and we try to make it short.
Okay.
How about that?
I think I'll try to be concise. Yeah. Not my specialty.
It's for your sake, really. I mean, I don't mind. We can talk for hours. But Blue World was begging for you to answer this question, so I'm going to give him that favor, I guess. So does he remember roughly how many sentence counts he had at the end of deleting his deck? Tried asking that like twice before, but never got a response. Generally curious. You might have to give a bit of context.
Yeah. I mean,
briefly.
Yeah, so when I was learning Japanese, I made sentence cards. Okay. I made about 10 a day for like about a 5-year period. I think I had around 15,000 when I deleted my deck.
Okay. Wow.
And I used to think of it as like, okay, that, and I know I've famously said many times that, after that 5-year period, my passive vocabulary was pretty much caught up to a native speaker, minus specific pockets like food and stuff like I mentioned before. But like overall, especially with like literary vocabulary and things like that, I was basically like caught up to a native. So I used to think that it's kind of like, okay, that's the number of cards that you need, 15,000. But since then, there's been lots of people that just go crazy on making cards. They'll make like 50 cards a day and stuff. And so I've met people that, have like, over 20,000 cards, but they still seem to have like less of a passive vocabulary than me, right? There'll still be a lot of stuff that I know and they don't know, and there's not a lot of the reverse. So it made me realize that I probably learned a lot more without cards than I initially realized, which makes sense because like, again, I was only limiting myself to 10 words a day. So everything outside of that, I just have to pick up naturally. Or I was always picking, like, what are the most high value words I can make? So if there was a word that felt like I probably will remember that even without a card, I wouldn't make it. So if you're over relying on the cards, my number is not going to replicate my results, right? You have to replicate the whole process, which is that, I'm doing 10 words a day and I'm also learning a lot of stuff outside of Anki.
Actually, I'm going to pick this one because that could be relevant to me. That could be helpful for me as well. So Fantasy MMOS, has there been any shows recently that you have found to be good that you would recommend to others to use for immersion? I know you mentioned Tokyo Swindlers to be a good show. Any others you might like?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been watching that much Japanese like shows since I moved to Japan because, I mean, I mostly just go interact with like real life Japanese people. And especially the last couple of months, I'm like learning Chinese, so I'm watching mostly Chinese shows when I'm like watching shows. And also like the question of like what shows are good for learning, it's kind of hard because like when I'm watching a Japanese show, I already understand it, so I'm not like coming from that frame of like what's good for like learning, so it's kind of hard. I mean, ultimately the show that's good for learning is just the show that is really good, period, and like keeps your attention, you want to watch. I mean, recent shows that are good in the last couple of years, like the anime Chi I watched recently, I think it's called Orb in English.
Okay.
That was very good and probably one of my favorite animes of all time. But it's very hard though, so probably not very good for learning unless you're like already at a really high level.
Would you recommend maybe things like reality TV kind of thing? Because it's kind of like spontaneous.
I mean, if you can stomach reality TV, it's some of the best input, especially to like learning how people talk in real life. So I mean, like I watched all of Terrace House like a couple of years back, and I think it's super helpful to learn how to speak naturally and understand natural speech. Some people can't, like, hate it. Other people really like it. I actually enjoy it. So if you can enjoy it, then like that stuff's really good. And like YouTube now, Japanese YouTube's finally starting to get kind of decent. So if you go and look, you can find some good YouTube. I think some people write it off too quickly. They're like, oh, it sucks compared to English YouTube. Arguably, it still sucks compared to English YouTube. But like, if you can get off your mighty horse for a couple of minutes and like, set your reset your standards a little bit, try to understand the Japanese style of editing from its own perspective. There's still some stuff that's really fun and that is pretty enjoyable too. So also like dramas, like Brush Up Life was a really good drama.
Okay. I'm taking notes now.
that like I can recommend. I feel like maybe there was like one other show that was like pretty good. A show I watched recently that was like really funny, that was by the same person as Brush Up Life, was Kaku Oeru Nikki. That also is kind of like good. It's like if you want to learn how to make Japanese small talk, that's like the ultimate show for like Japanese small talk. The whole thing is basically just like genius small talk. So I mean, I should probably prepare like a better list of like recommendations.
Well, if you have any afterwards, I'll put them in the description box.
Also, if you join my online community Immersion Dojo, I have a section recommendations, and also a lot of other members have given each other recommendations.
All right, I'll link everything below. All right, so we're gonna stop there. Thank you very much for the conversation. I was telling you I thought it would be an hour, but honestly, it was really interesting.
Always have too much to say.
I mean it. Like, it was really interesting, and I always I love all our interactions so far. So here you go. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. It was fun.
Cheers.
See you next year, maybe.
Maybe next year. Hopefully, I'll be in the same city as you, and we'll organize that properly, unlike last year. But yeah, all right. Thank you very much, Matt.
Sweet.
And I will see you later, guys. Bye bye.